Welcome to another presentation in our series Rereading Revelation. The series ended with presentation number 27, but we are doing 3 postscripts, and this will be the second of the postscripts, I am calling it Estimates and Underestimates of Revelation. So here is the PS, the postscripts, and we did already Revelation's twin in the Old Testament. Revelation has a twin, an Old Testament twin. They're not the same in time, so it's a little hard to be a twin when you are born so much earlier. But the book of Job was our, in the previous presentation, we said the book of Job is Revelation's twin. Its colleague. They are a twosome in the Bible for the message they bring. And Job actually helps us understand Revelation better, and vice versa. It works both ways. So now for the second one, we do estimates and underestimates of Revelation. And I have 3 things that I'd like to share. One is Revelation, some say, it fails theologically. There is a theological defect in the book, because at the end there is an inside and an outside. And there shouldn't be an outside. Everything should be on the inside. That's one. And then there are 2 very typical comments that people have when they read this book, or when they read Bible prophecy maybe. One is to say God is in control. And that's a good thing to say maybe, but it isn't the message of Revelation. It's not the way Revelation thinks or works. That is a poor fit. And then we have this one, all is well that ends well. And that's another popular saying. It's not really good theology, and it is not the message of Revelation either. So those things I'd like us to do, they are postscripts, and just reflecting on this. So I will read a statement by Leonard Thompson, whose book, the book of Revelation, Apocalypse and Empire, has been a very influential book in Revelation circles, and I have learned a lot from it and benefited from many of his insights. And let's read what he says. As he gets to the end of Revelation, we are dealing here in part with the place of revenge and retribution in the book of Revelation, with the confidence that those outside the circle of true knowledge cannot succeed, that they must be outside the city gate and beyond the temple wall. He doesn't like that, or he has some misgivings about it. Is there hope for those outside? Is the city gate of the New Jerusalem closed forever on such people? Can God be all in all if the gate is closed for eternity? Those are questions that there shouldn't be an outside, or that sort of puts a little bit of an asterisk or something, a slight negative in Revelation, that it doesn't quite deliver, because in the end we should just have an inside. Everyone should be brought inside. And here in my illustration here from the tapestry in Angers, here is the outside. Let me see if I can get this to right. And that outside is a problem. That outside should not be there. Those depicted as outside the city here, those depicted outside should be brought inside. Why doesn't Revelation do that? That is the issue for Leonard Thompson. And I think he puts it in very sort of, it's a it's a reasonable comment, or at least a well-intentioned comment. So, is there an inside and an outside in the text? There is. There is definitely a line of demarcation here, as we see the city wall here, and there is inside and there is outside. And in our text in Revelation 21:8, but as for the cowardly, the faithless, the abhorrent, the murderers, the fornicators, the sorcerers, the idolaters, and all liars, their place will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. Not a bright prospect on the outside. And then in almost at the very end of the book, another picture of things inside and outside. Blessed are those who wash their robes, so that they will have the right to the tree of life, and may enter the city by the gates. That's going inside. And then outside are the dogs, and sorcerers, and fornicators, and murderers, and idolaters, and everyone who loves and practices falsehood. So textually, we are really in a corner. We are really sort of caught. The text doesn't give us much option or much sort of leeway for construing the end of the outside. Rather, it talks about the end of those on the outside, as it were. So I'd like to look at this inside-outside thing under three headings or three topics, all of them drawn on those texts that we just read, 21:8 and 22:14 and 15. First, courage versus cowardice. That the first mention, or the quality or absence of quality mentioned on those outside, are those who are cowardly. So how can that be? Because that is really quite a strange virtue. That should that count? That's the issue. Courage versus cowardice. And then there is trust versus distrust, because those on the outside are also those who did not trust, or who are apistos, who are faithless. And then there is the notion of truth versus falsehood, because in both of these texts, 21:8 and 22:15, there are those who are not telling the truth, and in the second text here, those who actually love to not tell the truth. So those are issues. And to approach this, I'd like to do an analogy. I'd like to just take our vision here into life as we know it in reality, human experience, and just try out some thoughts that might be helpful, even though I don't think they will totally close out the subject. So I will be reading from this book. This is the second volume of Saul Friedlander's book, and I do not think anyone has written better about the Holocaust than Saul Friedlander. Now, I have many good books, historical and people first-hand accounts, and Saul Friedlander was a child during World War II and did escape. His parents sent him off to someone. He ended up in a monastery in France and actually converted to Christianity in a way that wasn't very nice, because those who were to take care of him, maybe they shouldn't have tried to do that. So he had a huge identity crisis before he ended up in Israel, and is one of the leading historians on the Holocaust. So toward the end of this book, with the years of extermination, Saul Friedlander writes, "Not one social group." Oh, that's in the this is in the foreword to this book. I will quote what he says at the end in a minute. not one social group, not one religious community, not one scholarly institution or professional association in Germany, not one, and throughout Europe, declared its solidarity with the Jews. Some of the Christian churches declared that converted Jews were part of the flock up to a point. That there was a declaration in Germany in some Protestant circles that Jews that had converted to Christianity, they were to be treated as equals in the church. But that was a fig leaf protection for those Jews in the church. What was at stake was their right to be citizens of the state. And even though there was that kind of church declaration, it didn't help the Jews much because they were at risk in relation to the state, and not one stood up for them. Not one social group, not one religious community, not one scholarly institution. So I am putting this under the headline Courage versus Cowardice. That there was a need for courage that simply wasn't there, and it put the Jews at risk. That's what happened. That's what life offered up for them. Thus, he says, Friedlander says, thus Nazi and related anti-Jewish policies could unfold to their most extreme levels without the interference of any major countervailing interests. It was just, green light for this, because not one showed up to help them. So in real life, whatever happens outside the New Jerusalem in the book of Revelation, the New Jerusalem in the book of Revelation talks about the need for courage and singles out cowardice as a problem. But we have learned in our time, in our recent history, that failing to show courage can be a huge detriment to people who are at risk, to people who are vulnerable. And so we're still on that same topic, and I'm still using events in the 20th century as an example. So here, this is the area in Nuremberg where the Nazis staged a political religious festival in September every year for quite a few years of the Nazi era and before Hitler came into power. It was an extremely festive occasion, and the choreography was amazing. It was really captivating, and 1 million people or more would come to Nuremberg for those events. And the area here is still there. You can still go there. I have been there. I have run around all over that place and tried to sort of reimagine what happened. So at the end of his book, page 656 in Friedlander's second volume, he talks about Hitler coming to an end. One of the most criminal political leaders in history was about to put an end to his life, suicide. There is no point in probing once more the mind of Adolf Hitler or the twisted emotional sources of his murderous obsessions. It has been attempted many times without much success. However, the significant and unavoidable historical question, the one that we briefly addressed in the introduction and repeatedly throughout the volume, has to be considered again at the end. Well, what might that be? What might that question be? That's what we are awaiting now for Friedlander to tell us. And so, the major question that challenges all of us is not what personality traits allowed an unknown corporal of the Great War to become the all-powerful leader Adolf Hitler. That's not the question. Here is the question. But rather, why tens of millions of Germans blindly followed him to the end, why many still believed in him at the end, and not a few after the end. What is that? That sort of belief. Now we are not just anymore only in the territory of courage versus cowardice. Now we are in the territory of trust versus distrust. Why did people trust Adolf Hitler? And why are we prone to trust people who do not deserve our trust, or institutions or claims that are highly undeserving of our trust? That's the issue, the sort of trust issue here. So in Revelation, outside depicting lack of courage and distrust or lack of trust, disbelieving, as it were, that's the issue. And here, not to make a sexist comment here, but these are women, not the men. That's a given too, and sure, let there be equality here. But these are women, these are young women, these are mothers with children, and they really think he's a great person. They really have high hopes for him, even though he will call on them to volunteer their children for the most wicked project that history has ever seen, just about. Or the second most wicked. Let's make it the most wicked. It doesn't hurt. So why is that? Why was there such trust in this person? And I'm again looking to Revelation to say that these types of commitments, they must have some consequences. You can't just erase them. It wasn't easy after the war. And this, I have this from one of the people who, Victor Klemperer, who was a Jewish scholar in Dresden, who wrote amazing diaries of the war years under the title "I Shall Bear Witness." And Victor Klemperer says that when he came back to his university, because Jews were disenfranchised and they were not allowed to show up for work anymore. They lost their jobs, they lost their livelihood. He came back after the war to his university, and the professors who had not stood up for him, not defended him, let him go, no courage, no solidarity or any kind. When he came back after the war, how are you? How have you been? You know, it was just like life was going to go on like nothing had happened. It doesn't necessarily work that way. It was not easy for him. In some ways, that was one of the hardest things for him to adjust afterwards. I have these pictures in my commentary. I have this picture here, and maybe that was a bit of a risk to put a picture like that in a commentary on Revelation, but I did it to have an illustration for the need to take a stand, maybe, because Revelation seems to think that is necessary in the context of its story too. So here are these adoring women, and here are these adoring men, and here they seem to be the same, and they give their salute with the straight, stiff right arm in a 1936 rally here. And then there is a person, can you see him? There is a person in the middle who is standing like this, just like that. And my, do I wish, if I had been there, that I would have been that person. My, do I wish that. That would have been something. This is August Landmesser, who actually initially was a supporter of Hitler, actually was a party member, but then he fell in love with a Jewish woman, and they actually got married and had a child. But the Nuremberg laws, the racial laws, made it illegal for Germans to have relations with Jews. So they were separated. She perished in 1942, I believe, and he perished later in 1944. So he disappears because he was conscripted into the army and disappears in Croatia. But there is a kind of, is it courage or is it just disbelief? I'm not going to do this. I'm simply not going to do this. It's not worth it, and maybe so. But yes, there must be an element of courage because everyone is doing it and everyone is expecting you to do it too. That's the issue. So we don't quite escape here in our time, in our reality in this life. The issue of courage versus cowardice comes to us, and in Revelation it assesses something there too that seems to call for a measure of courage. I do not want to get bogged down in this picture, and I'm not going to to say that it breaks along the lines of courage and cowardice, but I am going to say that it breaks along the axis of trust versus distrust and truth versus falsehood. So here, what was true? Is it true that the election was stolen? Is it true that there was some, very sinister thing going on? Who is telling the truth? Who is deserving of trust? And maybe this was just a tiny, tiny Mickey Mouse rehearsal for the real thing. But if it was a rehearsal, even a tiny one, it didn't go well, it seems to me. Now, this is not to compare what happened here. It happened more recently to what happened here. But this is a pretty serious wound in the body politic of America. And here with this illustration. So let's look at some textual issues again, and a couple of points here on my right. Courage versus cowardice and the prospect of coercion, that someone might just throw into this courage against cowardice an element of coercion. So here, neutrality is a luxury not always on offer. I want to be neutral. I'm not going to take sides. I'm not going to, I'll just stay neutral. I'll be an independent, as it were. And neutrality is a luxury not always on offer. It was not on offer in Nazi Germany during the Hitler years. And then if one side in a conflict is committed to deceit and violence, they try to deceive you, they lie, and they use coercive measures. Neutrality will not keep me safe because the opposing side does not believe in neutrality. They demand more from me than that I stay neutral. They don't say, it's okay for you to be neutral. They don't accept that. The message of the first angel, that the hour has come, the critical moment, uses the word krisis in Greek. And that is the moment to decide that you have to go one way or the other. And let's just look at the text that is behind that call. In what we talked about, the dragon acts and God reacts long ago in our series. But here is what the dragon is up to. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was commissioned to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who live on the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. So this phenomenon is now trying to build support and building its following. And then it was empowered to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast might even speak and cause those who do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. So here you say yes or we'll kill you. So now the pressure is building, not to be deceived, not to give in to these coercive measures. And the background text for this is in the book of Daniel, the image to the beast. It echoes the story in chapter 3 in the book of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar has had a dream of an image, statue, gold, silver, so on. And then after his dream, he thought, well, that's a nice dream. And there are just a couple of things about it I don't like. I want the whole image to be of gold. I don't accept the idea that I should be a transient, sort of passing influence in history. I want to make Babylon great again. I want it to last forever and ever, as it were. And he builds this statue, and he compels, or he calls on everyone to support it. And if they do not support it, he will burn them alive. And this is a painting of that scene from about 1575, I believe, from post-Reformation times. And here is the fiery furnace, and Daniel's 3 friends are going to be thrown into the fiery furnace. Before that happens, they answer Nebuchadnezzar, who says, well, if you don't come along, well, I will, burn you. So they say, this is how they talk. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. He can do it. But if not, even if he doesn't deliver, let it be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. There is certainly an element of courage here. And I read this many years ago in a column in one of the US newspapers, that when the war was going badly for the Allies, the Second World War, and they had to evacuate all the troops from France to Great Britain, then a telegram was sent from the French side of the English channel to the British side saying, but if not, something isn't worth doing, even though the forces bearing down on you are strong. So I have one more example just in a minute. Let me close out this part by referring to Martin Niemöller, who was also in some ways deceived by Hitler, but came to his senses. And then after, or some time into this experience with the Nazis, he talks about the need to take a stand, the need to show courage. First they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. So life teaches us that courage is called for. Life does that. Now Revelation does it too. Maybe not because in a sort of arbitrary way, just because that's how things are. And we cannot escape that way of it. And so here then at the end there is a kind of letting go. At the very end of Revelation, he said to me, "Do not seal up the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is near." And then he sort of seals it and lets it go. Let the evildoer still do evil, and the filthy still be filthy, and the righteous still do right, and the holy still be holy. It is as though the groups separate. And there is a final analogy in the story of Hitler here, who, can't he change his mind? Can't he come to his senses? Can't he back off? Early on in the war, this is from Joachim Fest, who has written major works on this period and has written a beautiful, beautiful book about his own father. But here he has a scene from the time when Hitler had attacked the Soviet Union and the war was not going well. And the Russian Foreign Minister Molotov was offering a truce to the Germans and to the German Foreign Minister von Ribbentrop. And then Hitler so von Ribbentrop thinks that Hitler should accept. And then Hitler tells von Ribbentrop, if I were to come to an agreement with the Russians today, I would attack them tomorrow. I can't help myself. There is a kind of sort of sclerosing of the faculty of decision making in our lives. And surely that statement by Hitler shows someone who has sclerosed and is not able to extricate himself. I have learned a lot from Jacques Ellul. Maybe I'm quoting this just to have one chance to give a final tribute to his extremely fine work on the book of Revelation. He was not a biblical scholar primarily, he was a sociologist, but he was, in my view, an excellent reader of these texts. So he says about the notion of judgment, the judgment being never juridical but revelatory, it is not the expression of the servile terror of men, but of their comprehension of the divine reality. And this one, even better. The judgment at this moment is then to be what one has always wished to be, but seeing in the light of God what it was. Those are concepts of judgment that seem to really be what should I say, to get to the heart of it. I have shown this before in a couple of previous presentations, just on the point that God is in control. That doesn't describe Revelation well, because God cedes, God lets go of control in this book, and God is seen as though God is not in control. What God is committed to is a certain value system, not a certain outcome. It's the value system that will sort of map the path to an outcome, not a certain outcome, whatever the cost. That is key. God has given it into their hearts to carry out God's purpose. They get to do what they want to do. That will be God's purpose too. And bring about one single purpose, to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God be brought to completion. Here God cedes control. He lets go and turns things over and lets the other side go ahead. And we had this thing in Revelation 17 about Satan who disappears, surrogates appear, and then he will reappear. And that was his plan. And then this was God's plan. And it seems to be very similar. And yes, that was God's plan, to let the other side carry out its plan. And for this type of scenario, the notion that God is in control is not a good or precise prescription. And here, Solzhenitsyn, who got the Nobel Prize in Sweden in 1970 and said this in his noble lecture. He talks about the link between lies and violence, and he is talking about the Soviet system. The link between them, the lie and violence, is fundamental and entirely natural and organic. Violence has nothing to cover itself with except the lie, and the lie has no way of maintaining itself except by violence. I agree with both of those. Anyone who once proclaims violence as his method is inexorably bound to choose the lie as his principle. In the cosmic conflict depicted in Revelation, it begins with the lie and a violence in order to defend the lie, because those things go hand in hand. And God doesn't simply intervene and take control here. He lets this play out, and the combination of a lie and of violence will in the end implode. And we have explored reasons for that earlier. Okay, one final point here. The saying, all is well that ends well. I'm not going to do a long take on this. I just want to agree with Gordon Graham, who taught in Scotland. I think he is from the UK. He has been a professor at Princeton for a number of years now. He's written a very fine book called Evil and Christian Ethics. And he says the plain implication of this is that heavenly bliss can only mitigate earthly torment. To say that it ends well is not entirely reassuring. Heavenly bliss can only mitigate earthly torment. It doesn't justify it. If we are in search of a theodicy, what we want to know is not what God is going to do about these things now that they have happened, but why they were ever permitted in the first place. Accordingly, as a theodicy, the appeal to compensatory bliss fails, and manifestly, I should say. So, is the message of Revelation all is well that ends well? No. The message of Revelation is to take the story from the beginning, and even to take us into that territory. Why were things ever permitted in the first place? Those bigger questions, not just to sort of put some gloss on the outcome. So we will have one more postscript and say a little more about those things. And here, just to affirm and hopefully have illuminated somewhat the need for courage and for trust and for truth. Those are the values on the inside. And to eschew cowardice, distrust, and falsehood. Those are the values on the outside.